Well, a few years ago, I was going through this process as a pastor, which many pastors go through, a process called ordination. And if you're like new to church, you're like, what? Like ordination is this process that really is a ton of work. It results in no more pay, and you sometimes get free parking at the hospital, and you get the ability to marry people. I know you're also excited to get ordained now, right? But it basically is the process that you go through to get the words reverend before your name. And so I was in the midst of that process, and it's quite a, depending on the denomination, it can be a really, really heavy process. Mine took just over a year, and there's tons of studying, and there's papers to write, and you got to send content, and all this stuff. And at the end, you literally go into a room for like 3 hours, and they just interrogate you. It's intense. But throughout the process, one of the things you had to do was you actually had to send them some of your sermons that you preached, and you had to like send either the video or the audio or whatever, and then they would critique it. And just like your papers, they would make sure that more than one person critiqued it and graded you, which some of you wish like schooling was like that, because you're like, this professor, no matter what I do, will never be happy. So this was their way of making sure that even if one person didn't like it, but it's like this person gave you an A and this person gave you a D, you'd kind of be like, oh, what's going on here? And so that's exactly what happened with one of my sermons, where two people graded the same sermon, and the first guy, Ron, I remember him dearly because of his nice comments. I even remember his name. Ron wrote like, great message, such a lively intro, so much energy, I love it. Like it was just like all written, but I could just feel it, right? And the next guy critiquing the exact same sermon gave it like a D, and his response, so it wasn't like they were looking at different content. He literally said like, intro lacked energy. And I'm like, what? Like, it may be true, but like, how are we so far apart? It's almost like Ron was like, buddy, you found your calling, keep going. And the other guy's like, I think you might want to re-explore what you're doing with your life, right? Like, I'm like, seriously, like the questions of purpose and destiny and calling and what am I going to do when I grow up aren't complicated enough. Forget about all the opinions of everybody else around you that they have, right? It's like, some people are like, that's so great, you're so good at that, go for it. And other people are like, no. Some of you, it's like, it's in your own family. Like your dad's for it, your mom's against it, vice versa. Your siblings can't even agree, right? It's like you can't even figure it out. Forget about all the opinions, like you can't even figure it out. If you've ever felt that tension, or maybe you're now further along, you have a niece or nephew who are trying to figure out some of those questions, like today's a perfect day. Today's a perfect day for anyone who's ever wrestled with what they're supposed to be doing in their life and has just felt the pressure of everybody having an opinion of what God wants them to do with their life. If you're here today and you're kind of visiting, you're not a church person, not a Christian, you picked the perfect day because you're kind of often maybe wondering like, what is it that Christians do? Like, I feel like I know their moral ethic because sometimes Christians are really loud about what you morally should and shouldn't do, but like, what is it they actually do? Like, what are they called to do? Like, do they do anything or do they just tell other people what to do? Like, is that the Christian life? Like just telling other people they're wrong? Like what? How does this work? So today you kind of get a glimpse into the scriptures, into a story that gives us this awesome word picture of what every Jesus follower is called to do. And I'm so excited about it. And it comes up on this journey that we've been on going through the book of 1 Corinthians, which was a letter that was written 2,000 years ago to, as Robin said, a really messed up church, which is good because we're kind of a messed up church too. In fact, most of them are. And the ones that aren't usually are the ones that are the most messed up. They just don't know it, right? But like, there's something about this letter that even though it's 2,000 years old, fashion has changed, culture has changed, government has changed, the core human condition hasn't changed. The things we still all long for, the things we still wrestle with, all those things are still the same. Humanity is still the same. And so it's incredible. And some of you have been on the journey. You've just realized like, wow, like this was written 2,000 years ago, but this is so relevant to my life today. And that's what we're going to discover as we talk about purpose and calling and what is it that we're supposed to be doing with our lives. And as this letter is being written, it's written to a church that is arguing and disagreeing about all different kinds of things. And in fact, they're kind of critiquing the guy who's writing the letter, who started the church, who's not living in the city of Corinth anymore. His name's Paul. And they've been, he's like, hey, I'm getting word that you're saying this about me and that about me, and you don't think I'm a very eloquent speaker, and you have all these disagreements about this, and milk and solid food argument. If you were here for that, you got it. You can always catch up online if you wanted to follow along with the journey. And other people like too much Jesus or too much about the cross, and Paul, so there's like all this arguing. Basically, 2,000 years ago, everybody had an opinion on how the pastor was doing. See? not much has changed, right? Like, it's just the same in every church. And Paul continues to give these really cool word pictures that we've been unpacking every week. He's like, you guys are like a building. You're like a temple. He just keeps giving word pictures. And today, in response to all their critique that they've been giving, he gives another word picture, which I absolutely love. And we're going to spend our whole day today in 1 Corinthians chapter 4. So if you want to jump to 1 Corinthians chapter 4 on your device or paper Bible, however you want to follow along. And if you don't have one with you, don't worry about it. We'll have it up on the screen in a moment for you to follow along. But I know some of you like to highlight, underline, circle, make sure what I'm preaching is actually in the book. Like, I get that. Like, you go ahead. So just take a moment, find where we're going to be, 1 Corinthians chapter 4. All right. So this is Paul continuing on with these word pictures. This, in response to their critiquing him, like, hey, you're this, you're that, you're not this, you're not that. He's like, this is how you should regard us. This is how one should regard us. As servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Servants and stewards. Servants of Christ, stewards of the mysteries of God. We'll unpack all that language because that feels like a lot. But servants and stewards, he's like, I got another word picture for you. He's talking about what at the time was this Greco-Roman household keeper. He's like a household manager. He's like, okay, we're switching analogies again. He's like, I want you to think about your life like a household manager. It's like everyone at that time would have been like, okay, we're with you, Paul. Like, what about the household manager? He's like, so let's just be clear about something. Moreover, it's required of stewards that they be found faithful. If you're given something to steward, something to manage, you are going to be held accountable for the thing that you were asked to manage, okay? If you are a manager, you will be held accountable by your boss for the thing in your title that you manage, okay? If you're the facility manager at the Sleeman Center, nobody's going to hold you accountable if the Storm doesn't win. They're going to hold you accountable if the place isn't clean, if the ice isn't frozen, and the ice isn't scratched, like all that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, you are responsible for what you have been entrusted with. So Paul's like, do you get this? Do you get this? Do you get this? They're like, yeah, we get it, Paul, right? And so basically what he's saying is he's like, guys, follow the metaphor. If you're like a housekeeper, the house that you manage, that you steward, that you serve is something Paul throws out called the mysteries of God. If I could summarize what Paul is basically saying, and he's going to say in this whole passage, we're going to bottom line here at the end. So those of you who want to take a nap, here's where we're going in the end. You are a steward of the mysteries of God. You're a manager of the mysteries of God. To which you're like, what does that even mean? Like, that just, like, mysteries of God. This is a theme that Paul loved to talk about, the mysteries of God, because in the ancient world, they didn't understand everything that we understand. So anything that happened that you couldn't explain, it was the gods, right? Like, the ocean was raging. Like, they didn't talk about, the tides and the weather patterns. They're like, Poseidon is angry, right? Like, you didn't win the battle. It was just like the gods of war weren't on your side. You couldn't get pregnant. You couldn't get love. Eros was mad at you, right? Like, everything that you couldn't explain, it was like, well, the gods are mysterious and we don't quite know. And so we try this and we sacrifice kids here and we sing these songs and we beat these drums and like, it's kind of all mysterious. And so we just try and make sense of all the chaos. And then on top of that, you had these rulers that would come in and they would be like deified deities. They'd be like, yeah, we're actually gods too. And so people just had all different kinds of ideas of what God was like. And so you have these rulers and these tyrants, and people are called to worship them. So like, is God this tyrant? Is he angry? Is he vengeful? Like what is God like? It was a mystery. And Paul was classic for calling out the fact that he's like, hey, there are mysteries of God. He's like, but as Jesus people, they're not mysteries anymore. We know, because Jesus followers, Christians, we believe that God 2,000 years ago did something incredible, where he took away the mystery. He's like, you want to know what I'm like? I'm writing myself into human history in the person of Jesus Christ. The author of Hebrews says that Jesus Christ in the flesh was the perfect representation of what God is like. That if you're not a church person, not a Christian, you've always kind of wrestled with what's God like? The thing I tell people all the time is I'm like, hey, forget about everything you've ever believed about God and just start reading the life stories of Jesus. And everything that you see in the life stories of Jesus is what God is like. So some Christians in the room, I was talking with one yesterday, they're like, I think I added Jesus to my framework of what God was like, and I got this like loving Jesus who's also very, very, very angry. Because they just added it to this idea, this mysterious God they had in their mind. And I love what Bill Johnson says. He has this awesome quote. He says, everything you think you know about God that you can't find in the person of Jesus, you have reason to question. It's so good. I tell people all the time, like here's what you could do. You could literally make a list of what you think God is like. And then start with the Gospel of John. I'm reading the Gospel of John right now, so then we can have coffee and chat about it. It'll be awesome, okay? But just read the Gospel of John and see if you find all those things in there. It will immediately start to change your idea of what God is like. And Paul is like, guys, we're stewards of this knowledge. That God is not this mysterious, out there, hope we don't anger, I hope we sacrifice the right amount of children to make him happy. He's like, God is loving. God is kind. He's compassionate. He loves in a way that some might call reckless, that it doesn't seem to quite make sense. He's so loving. That in fact, it wasn't just religious people that liked him. In fact, often religious people didn't want anything to do with him because they're just like, no, this isn't what we expect. But people who are nothing like Jesus, when you read the stories of Jesus, like Jesus. People who are nothing like Jesus, when you read the stories of Jesus, you'll discover they liked Jesus. That they were drawn to him, that they're kind of creeping up, trying to understand what Jesus is like. And that's why I'm like, just read the stories of Jesus. God's mysterious to you, read the stories of Jesus. It's perfect representation of what God is like. That instead of leveraging his power for control, as many of those people would have thought the gods would do because that's what they saw their rulers do, God leverages his power to give his life so that we can have a relationship in this life and the next with him. If you're here today and you don't have a relationship with Jesus and you're curious about that, don't leave here today without meeting our prayer team and inviting the Holy Spirit to come live inside you, to have a relationship with Jesus. That is so critical. Such a game. Some of you are like, I'm not quite there. It's okay. Just continue to journey along. We're constantly talking about having a relationship with Jesus. This is so mission critical to everything we do here at Lakeside. The bottom line is that God is so loving, he loved to the point of death, to give his life so that we could be brought to God. And Paul, who has a little bit of a shady past, is like, guys, when I encountered that news, when I discovered that God was nothing like I thought he was, and I discovered his love that reached out to me while I was on my way to go and persecute and beat up and maybe even kill some Christians, that he reached out and loved to me, he's like, the mystery's over. And he's like, and now my whole life is just stewarding that good news. I'm a manager of that amazing news that everyone else is still trying to please the gods. He's like, but I have this amazing news. He's like, and I'm just stewarding that. He's like, as Jesus followers, you're also a steward of the mysteries of God. Okay, so that's how he gets to that word picture and that imagery. And then some of you were like, okay, well, that sounds really nice. I'm a steward of the mystery of God, right? I'm gonna go on Etsy and buy a pillow or a mug or something that says, I'm a steward of the mysteries of God. But it sounds great, but what does that mean? Practically, how do we steward the mysteries of God? And I'm gonna get to that in a second, but Paul has more to say on this, which is so critical. I love this, okay? This is what Paul says. He says, but with me, it's a very small thing that I should be judged by you or any human court. He's like, guys, you're critiquing me, you're judging me. He's like, the fact that you're critiquing and the fact that you're judging me, he's like, it's literally of the smallest significance to me. It doesn't even matter. It's not important that you're judging me, which is like, what? And then it gets even weirder before it makes more sense. He says, in fact, I don't even judge myself. What? He's like, don't judge me. And by the way, I'm not judging me. I'm like, this sounds like a train wreck just waiting to happen. Paul, you have no accountability? Is that what you're saying? What is he saying in this moment? Because it's just so interesting. And in fact, it almost feels like, for those of you that know the scriptures and even know some of the things that Paul's written, it feels like a contradiction because just a few chapters later, Paul's gonna be like, you guys should be judging each other. You should be calling each other on things. And other parts of scripture, iron sharpens iron. We speak to each other. You see something wrong, you go and tell that person, right? So it's like, Paul's like, don't judge me. And I'm not even judging myself. It's like, what's happening? And I always tell you, when you find something that you think is contradictory or confusing in the scriptures, don't run away from it. Dig into it. And that's exactly what we do here. So then look what he says. He says, for I'm not aware of anything against myself, but I'm not thereby acquitted. He's like, guys, I think I'm actually doing a pretty good job. He's like, but that doesn't even matter because it's the Lord who judges me. He's like, guys, your opinion doesn't matter ultimately. My opinion doesn't matter ultimately. Ultimately, I'm a steward of God. And that matters. Think of it this way. Remember, he gave us the imagery of a household manager. If you hire me to do something in your household, okay, you hire me to clean your windows. It doesn't matter if your neighbor watches and says, wow, Mark has good squeegee technique, right? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if as I'm Windexing your windows, if I'm thinking to myself, birds are gonna die, these windows are so clean. Doesn't matter. It only matters that the homeowner thinks that I'm an awesome window cleaner. The neighbor doesn't matter, the worker doesn't matter, the owner matters. And Paul's like, guys, you can critique all you want, you can judge all you want, you can tell me all your thoughts, like that's important, but like ultimately it doesn't matter. It's God who judges. Not you, not me, it's not our opinions, it's God who matters the most. That's why he says, it's the Lord who judges me. And then he continues. He says, therefore, don't pronounce judgment before the time, before the Lord comes, who will bring to light the things now hidden in darkness and will disclose the purpose of the heart. Remember, he's talking about this. He's like, there's a judgment day. One day, everything that we did and the heart behind it will all be revealed. He's like, guys, you don't know. And you know what? This is really good news. Because I love this language that he has in here, right? He's like, the things now hidden in darkness and will disclose the purpose of the heart. He's like, there are things that look incredible that you're like, wow, they just love Jesus so much. He's like, but you don't know the heart behind it. And we know that, right? Like, you don't even have to be a Christian to believe that. Like, there are things in history where you have seen incredible movements where people are like, I'm so in that, that's so amazing. Like, wow, it's so great. And years later, people are trying to flee the country. It's like, this leader was totally the wrong one. We totally got it wrong. And forget about all the big names in history where crowds were enamored by someone and then realized later, like, this is the worst thing ever. We've all had this, haven't we? We've all had moments in our life where we're like, we're so in on this. We're so with this person, or we have the best idea. This is so good. This is going to change lives. And years later, we think this, what in the world was I thinking? That Paul's like, guys, it doesn't matter if you think it's a great idea or I think it's a great idea. He's like, ultimately, in the big picture, God's the owner of the house. And it's what he says that matters. Because we're easily deceived. This is how I'd summarize it. Humans are easily deceived, even by ourselves. And Paul's like, that's why I'm not as worried about your opinion. I'm not even as worried about my opinion. Ultimately, it is God's opinion that matters. So then you say, okay, so then what do we do with the fact that like he's telling us not to judge, but then 2 chapters later, he's gonna tell us that we should judge each other? Like, what do we do with that? Well, what if it's both? Well, what if we are actually, as a community, continually supposed to be challenging each other, encouraging each other, calling each other out on certain things, but he's just basically so bringing it to the bottom line to say, but guys, ultimately, you should sharpen iron, all that stuff, but ultimately, you don't live to please the opinions of everybody around you. Ultimately, you will have to give account before God. Paul's saying, don't forget who gets the final word. Don't forget who gets the final word. It is so easy, and some of you know this. Some of you ended up in careers that you're like, why am I here? Because you went with the opinions of people around you. He's like, ultimately, there is one voice that matters over every other voice. It is God's voice. Because isn't it true? Here's my summary of it. It is possible to satisfy everyone around you, including your church and yourself, and not be honoring the calling God has for you. When I think about this story and I think about my own personal life, it's the only life I've lived. I always have to share a story from my own life. I think about the fact that like when I left Bible college and was like, I'm not doing this ministry thing. I'm going into construction. If I had gone with the majority of the voices around me, people in my church, people in my family, it was, you are totally on the right path. This is so good. This makes so much more sense than what you were doing before and all that. And I would have missed out on what I'm convinced now is what I was actually called to do. That if I had simply gone with popular opinion and what people saw and the reality that they saw, not understanding everything, I would have missed out. And so Paul is just saying, guys, opinions aren't the be all end all. You need to consult with God. He's like, because he's the household manager, not you, and not the people around you. So no wonder Paul simply says, like, guys, I'm not so worried about your judgment that you think I'm doing it wrong. I'm not so worried about even my judgment. Ultimately, it's so much bigger. So that's why I just don't care about the opinions. I think about my pastor growing up, and I think about all the things he did in ministry, and he was probably one of the people that as I went through this passage this week, it just made me so grateful. And I text him all the time, I'm like, so grateful for you. But there's things I didn't appreciate about you as a pastor that I'm now so appreciative. And he was my pastor for years, and then he was a colleague of mine for years. I worked under him. And I just think of how many times as a colleague, I armchair quarterbacked how he was pastoring. I was like, oh, he's doing it wrong. And and he was the most humble person ever. Like, he would take so much critique, and he would, oh, that's a great point, and he would change certain things. And there were some things I just remember. It didn't matter if the whole staff was against him on something. And it wasn't because he was arrogant or prideful, because his whole life was the opposite. But there were certain things that he's just like, guys, I just can't do that. And you can see, and I see it now as I went through this text this week, I'm like, there was just this conviction where he's like, guys, your opinion, ultimately, in my opinion, he's like, I just sense from God, this is the way we're called to go, or this is the posture we're meant to have, or we're not supposed to do that. And he'd stick with it. He just had that sense of, hey, opinions are great, and I listen to all of them, but ultimately there is one voice that I'm gonna have to give account to. He says, as leader of the church, I just can't agree to that. And I so respect that now. It is so easy for us to be armchair quarterbacking other people. Like, how can they be following Jesus doing that? It's like, listen, when you stand before God, he's not gonna be like, hey, you are an amazing judge of other people. He's like, that's my job. It's like, yeah, challenge, encourage, question, sharpen each other. But ultimately, Paul's just like, listen, ultimately there's one voice that matters, because we are stewards of the mysteries of God. You are a steward of the mysteries of God. I am a steward of the mysteries of God. The good news is you have one job: steward the mysteries of God. One job. And God is your boss. And God is the one who you're gonna have to give account for. And that sounds scary, right? He's like, oh, he's our boss. And it's like, I can please everybody else and not please him, but just remember this, just think about this, okay? The most loving person to ever walk the earth, who loves you more than anything, who went to the cross to die for you, is the one that you would give account for in your life. That means we should draw closer to God in the midst of this conversation, because he is the only one, God is the only one that can help us discover our destiny and calling, what we have been designed to do, and how we have been designed to live. I have my second most favorite Bill Johnson quote. Here it is. If you knew who God made you to be, you never want to be anybody else. That as you're trying to figure out what does it look like to be a steward of the mysteries of God. I wish I had 5 things for you to do that would make you a steward of the mysteries of God. I don't have it. I tell you the time, we're not called to be cookie cutter Christians. God has a specific call on your life. And what you're called to do is figure this out. Paul's like, I want you to be stewards of the mysteries of God, where you are right now in your life, in the situation that you have before you right now. I want to share some stories of some people that I know who I think do this well. I say think because I'm not the judge, so I'll just share them. I think of a nurse I met years ago, and I love just asking people, like, what is it that you do that you're passionate about, or what is it that you do? I love that conversation. I literally, it's my favorite to get seated at the leftovers table at weddings. I tell you all the time, they always put the pastor at the leftover table, the awkward people who have no place with anyone else. It's my favorite, because I'm just like, so tell me about you. Tell me everything there is to know about this industry. And Guelph's so fascinating, right? Like, it's just like a whole new world for me. I'm like, tell me about pig farming. This is so, right? Like, everything I ever wanted to know. Tell me about automatic feed dispensers for cows. Like an hour conversation is mind-blowing, right? I just love hearing the way that people creatively in the midst of their environments are stewarding the mysteries of God. I think of this nurse that I met once, and she's like, I just love my job because I get to be in rooms with people and pray over them. Some of them are totally unconscious. They're not even aware that I'm there, but I'm there, and so I just love to just hold their hand and to pray with them and bring heaven to earth in that moment. Stewarding the mysteries of God. Think about the personal support worker when my dad was on his final weeks of life, and PSWs can be amazing or they can be horrible. Some of you know that from experience. And this one, she just loved Jesus. We discovered that pretty quick and found out that we were Jesus followers. And one of the things she loved to do was when everything was done, many of them would just kind of sit in the living room and wait for an alarm to go off or a monitor to beep or whatever. But she would just sit, be present with my dad, and sing over him. And when she found out we were Christians, she would sing old hymns over him as he slept. Just stewarding the mysteries of God in the midst of her environment right there. Think of a new family that's here at Lakeside for the last few months, and the dad, it was his birthday coming up, and I guess as a family, they all kind of get together and I don't know, go to the Mandarin or something. He's like, guys, I don't need gifts. I don't need another meal. He's like, I'm just so excited about what's happening in Hope House. I would love for you all to join me for the coldest night of the year and raise money. That in this moment, he's like, hey, I have this opportunity. The family's all already got it on their calendar. Come and join me for my birthday. It's the day before the coldest night of the year. I'm gonna invite them to walk with me. They raised $4,000 as a family. Just in the midst of his life, he's just like, how can I be stewarding the mysteries of God? What God has given me, I just want to steward that. Think about a friend of mine who's an actor. And when I say actor, I don't mean took a class in high school and was once an extra in the McCain commercial. If you zoom in, you can see him in the background. I mean like a legitimate actor that's on a few Netflix shows and on TV shows as well that you would all know. And often people find out, he's an actor and he's a Christian. They're like, oh my gosh, we're in the Left Behind series with Kirk Cameron. Like, no, like legit stuff. Sorry. That movie gave me nightmares, okay? I'm still not over it. But it's amazing because he's on some shows. In fact, recently he got on one of my favorite shows. I was so stoked, right? Because like all these people that I've watched forever, he's just hanging out with them. And then there's other times where he's on shows. I remember once, like there's this show I knew he was on. I didn't really know what it was about. And I saw a commercial for the show. And I literally was freaked out. I'm like, that's too dark. I can't even watch. Like the commercial gave me nightmares. And I remember in that moment just being reminded, because I have sat with them for hours and hours talking about his calling as an actor and hearing his heart. And a lot of Jesus people, I know this, having talked to him, a lot of Jesus people have thrown shade on him. And they're like, how can you be a Jesus follower and be part of that television show? Like, they don't worship Jesus on that show, right? Like, it's just like, they've just thrown so much shade on him. I remember sitting with him and his wife, and I remember his wife just at one point just saying, I wish people would know. I wish people would know the amount of prayer that he puts into every audition that he goes into. The amount of roles that are offered that he rejects because the flags go up and he just doesn't feel comfortable. The amount of pastors that he sits with and prays through the roles before he takes them. And you just hear his heart, and he's just like, I just want to be a light in a dark place. He's like, I just believe Jesus came for everyone, including the entertainment industry. And when you sit with him and get to hear some of the conversations that he gets to have on some of these sets of some of these shows that people are judging him for being on, it's incredible. And guess what? Your opinion and my opinion doesn't matter. He's going to have to stand before God one day and give account for how he stewarded the mysteries of God. You can spend your life being torn this way and that way by people's opinions, or you can say there's a greater voice that I must listen to. Think about a stay-at-home dad that I know who's reached the stage where, they're like, could go back to work. There's some margin. The kids are getting a bit older, and both he and his wife just feel like, no, I'm called to be a pastor to pastors. And so literally, if I texted him tonight, I could probably have coffee with him tomorrow and just share anything I was going through. And he'd be sitting there, chatting with me for hours, praying with me, caring for me. And I know of another stay-at-home parent who didn't need the money, but decided to go back to work and actually donate their paycheck to a ministry that they're passionate about. These are just people who are just like, God, how do I steward my time and the mysteries of God in the season that I'm in? I know another stay-at-home parent that's like, you know what? In this season, I feel like everyone has a side hustle, and I just feel like the way that I'm going to steward the mysteries of God in this season, in my life, for me, is to not take on one and to just be present with my kids and give them the presence in the same way that Jesus did, unrushed, unhurried. I'm not saying, just to be clear, that as a stay-at-home parent, you should or shouldn't go back to work or do this or not do that. I'm just saying, I'm not your boss. You're not stewarding my mysteries, you're stewarding God's mysteries, so have an answer for that. And figure it out, as you decide, as you discern where you're going and what you're doing, just remember, you're a steward of the mysteries of God. I got this hilarious phone call this week. One of our prayer team members, she called me and she's like, hey, do you know there's a psychic convention in town? And I'm like, yeah, I got it on my calendar. I got my tickets already. No. And just to be clear, before I continue this story, we don't believe in psychics here at Lakeside. We believe in Jesus, okay? Thank you, yeah, okay. Anybody who tries to access spiritual power not in the name of Jesus, we want nothing to do with, okay? So that's disclaimers there. Okay, so now I can talk about psychics for a second, okay? So they're like, did you hear? And I'm like, I've seen the sign. I think it's at the Legion. Like, it seems to be an every year thing. They're like, yeah, I think I'm gonna go next year. And I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, I'm gonna try and get a booth. I'm like, what? I think I actually said this. Sometimes I think things and don't say them. That's the testament to God's work in my life. I don't have to say them. And I'm like, that's a terrible idea. I just blurted it out. And they're like, no. They're like, these are people who are hungry for the supernatural. And we have him. His name's Jesus, and he gives us power through the Holy Spirit. Like, I'm just gonna go. If they'll let me have a table, I'll just pray for people in Jesus' name. And I'm like, I'm gonna see if any other prayer team members wanna come with me. It's like, these are like, what we should, and I'm just thinking, I'm like, I know incredible stories of missionaries in countries where they weren't even allowed to be Christians who would go to the Muslim calls of prayer, and as everyone's bowing down, they're just bowing down and praying in Jesus' name. We're not giving account to the opinions of everybody else. We are giving account to God to say, this is how I stewarded my life. And this person's like, I think I have some time. I'm gonna see if I can get a table. Pray with people in Jesus' name. See people get healed. I'm like, all right. My opinion doesn't matter. Share some cautions maybe. That's okay. We sharpen each other. We challenge each other. We encourage each other. That's what we do. You're a steward of the mysteries of God right here, right now, where you are. In the dead-end job that you feel like this is wrong. In the degree that feels pointless, like it's never gonna end. As you're at home with toddlers who feel like they're never gonna grow up. As you're home with teenagers or a spouse who feels like they're never gonna grow up. As you're in the retirement residence and you're feeling like they put me on the wrong floor with the wrong roommate, the wrong people. Right now, you're a steward of the mysteries of God. That is your one job. When I talk to high school students and university students who are like, I don't know what to do with my life, and I don't know where I'm gonna live, and what I'm gonna study, and what I'm gonna do, and the program I should take, and the career, and who I'm gonna marry, and I'm like, those are all minor details. You're a steward of the mysteries of God. The other stuff, yeah, it's important. Like, God will direct you on that, but like, don't forget wherever you end up, because most of us, like, we study one thing in school and end up somewhere totally differently anyways, right? The biggest thing is know that you are a steward of the mysteries of God. When people are like, but how do I know if I should marry them or not? Like, that's such a big question. I'm like, really? Like, I'm like, well, why do you want to marry them? Like, they make me feel so happy. I just feel so, when I'm with them. I'm like, break up right now. That's a terrible, like, that's not good. Like, Sega Genesis made me feel that way, and that didn't last, right? Like, seriously. Like, here's the question I love my pastor growing up. I'm gonna text him again this afternoon. My pastor used to ask this question in premarital all the time when he sat down with young couples that getting ready to get married. He's like, this is the question. He said, most couples never had an answer for this, have an answer for this. He said, how does this person that you want to marry help you serve God more? What was he saying? How does this person help you steward the mysteries of God more than if you didn't marry them? How does moving to this place, how does studying this, how does taking on this job or this promotion or not taking this promotion or not taking on this job or staying single or getting married or having kids or having more kids, how does this help you steward the mysteries of God more? There's a question that will guide you, and it will guide you now, because you are called to be a steward of the mysteries of God. Not when you graduate, not when you finally find him or her, not when you finally have the kids, or not when they're finally out of the house, or not when you finally retire. Right now, you're a steward of the mysteries of God. I don't have a list of how you figure that out. I just say you pray and say, Lord, I am a steward of the mysteries of God. Would you guide me? That every day, that's just the question you ask yourself. Lord, how am I stewarding the mysteries of God? It's gonna be so crazy different for all of us. And as I was telling the band this morning, I'm like, we don't want cookie cutter. We want a mosaic. That's gonna be beautiful. When every one of us just steps into our calling in the midst of what we're doing right now and says, how do I steward the mysteries of God where I am today? The world will change. I invite the band to come up, and I just want to pray for us before we sing this final song as a declaration, as a response to how good God is, that his mysteries are not unknown anymore. God, I'm so thankful that you entrusted a screw-up like Paul, and you invest in screw-ups like us, and we get to be stewards of your mysteries. For everyone who's thinking, not me, not now, God, I just pray that you would just bring to mind the ways in which they can steward the mysteries of God, even in the situation that they are in. Father, I pray for creativity to flow, uniqueness. You are the most creative being there ever has been, is presently, and ever will be. Creation is a testament to that. You have a way for us to steward your mysteries where we are today. May you lead us this week as we go back to our worlds and seek to be your stewards. Let's stand and sing. I love that song. As you're going, our prayer teams are coming up right now to the crosses. They're ready to pray with you for anything. You're interested in a relationship with Jesus or just to know more, come talk with them. They'd love to just pray with you where you're at right now. As well, on your way out, if you're grabbing your kids and coming to Newcomer Coffee, we'd love to see you there just outside these doors. We just really want to connect with you and just get to know you a little better. And lastly, as you go, if this message feels weighty, like another thing to do, one more job description on top of everything else to do, I'm just reminded of the verse where Jesus says, come take my yoke upon you. Yokes aren't beds, they're about work, and yet Jesus is like, this one's perfectly crafted. He says it's easy and light. And so next week, we're actually taking a pause from Corinthians and doing a whole series on this life in Jesus as we go through the Lent series. And I'm so, so excited for it. So just come with that idea of like, if you feel totally overwhelmed, that series is gonna be for you. We just so, so want you to discover your way that you're a steward of the mysteries of God. Have a great week, Lakeside.